Thank you, Justin. Next up, we have Chace Barber with Edison Motors.
Nice. Thank you. All right, I'll figure out how this thing works.
So this is forward, and that one's backward.
Is it?
So you went backward one.
It's loaded some pictures, not others. Figure it out.
All right, Chace is a truck driver with 14 years of experience. Chace and Eric started their own trucking company in their fourth year of university by restoring a 1969 Camel. Trucking company transitioned to hauling and installing electrical generation systems to designing and engineering hybrid diesel electric power systems. Never letting go of his passion for trucking, restoring classic trucks and driving. Chace was the only one to come up with the idea of Edison Motors that combined hybrid power systems with classic trucks they restored.
Right on. Well, thanks for having me back here again this year. And this is basically a presentation on Edison Motors, or what happens if a bunch of log truck drivers decide to build their own electric truck. It all started with this truck. This was our very first proof of concept. I had this old 1962 LW Kenworth. What we did is we took out the old Cummins. We dropped in a 3306 Cat diesel into it with a generator, put some batteries that we ripped out of a Tesla, and we made it a hybrid. It was a very rough, crude hybrid, but it was one of the first series parallel hybrids in North America. We took the lessons we learned from that and we designed our own truck with electric axles, better batteries, a proper Cat C9 with a proper generator built to go off-road, take mud and that. And last year I was here talking to you. We had only just built this truck. It wasn't road legal. We hauled this one load of, I think we were about 100,000 pounds total weight. We just moved it around the yard a few times, back and forth. We had done no real testing. So I'm here today about a year later, and we're gonna go over what we've learned in the year, what we've done, and what findings we came up with. So we started off just a lot of bobtail testing. Turns out when you take a bunch of parts just off the shelf and you gotta put all those parts together, it is a nightmare to get them all working properly. So for about the first 6-7 months after I left here, we were just getting this truck programming, going through the testing, getting it road legal, but after about 6 months, we actually were able to go through the certifications. We got a license plate, a VIN number, and that led us to move to on-road testing, which we did a whole bunch bobtailing. Then we grabbed my empty set of trailers. We worked our way up. Okay, well, the truck was working and bobtailing. How does it do pulling a trailer? So we would take it out, we would drive it for an hour or so, and it'd come back in, and we'd look at all the data, have a look, see if something breaks, and then we'd stretch it out. And slowly over time, we got the truck more and more reliable as we kept trying to find faults. It sounds ridiculous, but that's what you got to do, is you just got to keep constantly braking your truck, and we were really good at braking it. Then we finally got to the point where, okay, this thing is going out relatively reliably now. So we went out and we hauled a few logs. We were doing a bunch of mill-to-mill transfers. We loaded it up to about 155,000 pounds, took it down the highway, and we got multiple loads of logs delivered, several days of hauling, and problem-free. So that was our big success, is that it probably took about 10 months to get to the point where it was problem-free, but we got about 3 weeks of hauling without actually breaking anything. Not hauling all the time, but do a little haul, test it, look at the data, go back. It's kind of cool though, on our very first load, we got unloaded by the Laterno. What's cool about the Laterno is that Laterno was built in 1971 and it's full electric. I don't know if you guys have Laternos down here at your mills or not, but RJ Letourneau built those all to be electric hub drive motors, electric winches with a diesel generator. So our diesel hybrid truck was unloaded on its first load of logs with a hybrid Letourneau. And then the mill closed down, which kind of sucks because BC can't seem to keep a sawmill open anymore, unfortunately. So we hauled some of our own stuff around. There's just me grabbing the frame rails for the next few trucks we're building. We took her over to Alberta. I pulled around the 40 mid low bed, did some testing out there for about a month, and we finally got enough things that we've learned, enough data that we looked at that we could say, okay, what improvements do we need to make? What do we need to change on the next trucks going forward? What would we do differently? So if we go over those list of problems, because this truck is definitely not perfect, but we had the battery C rating. The C rating is how much the battery can charge and discharge relative to its capacity. What we found is our batteries had about a 2C discharge and charge rating, and that just wasn't enough to get there. It actually caused a problem with regen and charging. So instead of a Jake brake, it regens. So as you're coming down a hill loaded and you apply that brake, it puts power back into the batteries. Now we have the generator, and one of the problems where we were running is if the generator is on and you regen, you get an over voltage current because you're applying both to the battery at the same time, and that would fry something, or it wouldn't like it, or it'd throw a fault code. We just couldn't dump that much capacity. We played around, we're like, how do I get that generator to ramp right down while I'm charging? And that was a nightmare. We also had issues with the DC to DC links. DC to DC just kind of smooths out the voltage to maintain a constant voltage. Turned out we didn't actually need those anyways. That was a $40,000 part. We just ended up bypassing it, and the truck worked totally fine, very little, minimal loss in performance. One of the issues we also had was third-party programming. We were a very small company, so we hired a third party to do all the programming, because it is very, very hard to find a truck driver that can also program an electric computer. So we had to work with the programmer, and they would send over a program, and I'd go drive it, and the throttle mapping would be off. One example of the problems of this, and any truck driver can tell you why it was a bad idea, but they made it so that I couldn't apply the throttle and the brake at the same time. They said, well, why would you want to apply the throttle and the brake at the same time? Well, because I'm on a hill. I don't want the truck to roll backwards down the hill and then let go of the throttle. So that was a bit of communications, just coming from a trucking perspective, telling the computer programmer how a truck should behave. But I also think that's one of the benefits of us, is that we just had truck drivers telling the computer programmers. The 3-in-1 really needed to be a 4-in-1. So a 3-in-1, what that is it's basically your electric vehicle alternator. It charges the lead acid batteries for the 12-volt system, keeps that charged up. It runs the power steering pump, and it runs the coolant pump. And what we needed just a little bit more on that 3-in-1. We were doing too much with that. We had some wiring harness issues. We built this wiring harness ourselves. We did not do the best job of it. We had to constantly fix some problems with that, so we had to go out, get a professional wiring harness made. We had reversed axle issues. I'll show you the next slide here in a little bit to go over that. We also overloaded our CAN bus network. There was just a lot more communication than we thought. We had 2 CAN bus networks, and when you would have a fault code or something wouldn't work right, it would send out a lot of information all at once. So what we're doing is we're separating to a 3-4 CAN bus system, and 1 CAN bus will just prioritize priority features like, look, these are the essential emergency features you can't lose. They get their own separate CAN bus, and it just cleans up the network and doesn't overload it with too much information. Fault diagnosis. We need a little bit more information on our faults. That's still something we're working on, is that we got to find the faults, write out what the faults are, and make sure the truck displays those faults properly. And we prioritize safety a lot more. And for testing, obviously, when we threw a fault, it would shut the truck down. But okay, well, maybe if a light goes out, the whole high voltage system doesn't need to go down. So we can start playing with, okay, getting the truck a little bit more self-clearing on the faults. These are the successful things, though. We proved that the hybrid system works. We were able to drive and charge. We were able to run it off just batteries alone. We were able to run it off just generator alone. So we did a test where we totally shut the batteries off, like we lost all our batteries. and the generator was still able to drive the truck, and it was all able to work together. We did a lot of models for, well, how much power is it going to take to move the weight? We didn't know those are correct because we hadn't tested it, but turns out the engineers were pretty well bang on. A little off, but enough for per kilogram, per kilometer for how much we were moving. The power of this thing was insane. That is by far one of the biggest benefits, is that I was loaded with that wheeler setup. I had my buddy Joel, he was following behind me in a T800. He had about 600 horsepower, 18 speed. I pulled out on the highway pulling that setup. While he was behind me, he had trouble catching me bobtail. Every time he went to go shift a gear, I started pulling out ahead of him. This truck has about 1,000 horsepower, and it's flatline torque, smooth across the board. Actually, during the testing, we had a fault on axle 2. So we shut axle 2 off, disengaged it. That was one of the CAN bus problems we found. With just running one axle at 50% power, it was still able to take that 150,000 pounds and get it up to 60 mile an hour. It's just half the power. The regen holdback was fantastic. Speaking as it is an engine brake, it is above an engine brake for how it can hold back. We definitely had to do a lot of power mapping because it could lock up the tires on dirt if you came on a little bit too hard and soft, but that was just talking with the programmers. Yeah, and the nice thing is that the truck came out lighter than expected by a little bit. So we scaled in with that set of Super Bs, the exact same as a Western Star 4900 all rigged up. So the weight came out the same. We thought we were going to be like 1,000, 1,500 pounds more. And we can probably lose some weight because this is a heavy built truck. The fenders are all really heavy. It's just the weight balanced out. So we were actually happy that that worked out. This is where we get into the axles. So these are things that we've upgraded before. The axle just had one motor and it went into a ring and pinion and drove each wheel. Now it's got a lot of stuff on there that if you get it into the mud, there's hoses that can be ripped off. And it's also balanced way out the front. So the farther away you move, the more it's going to bang up and down on that housing. So now we've gone with 2 motors. So each motor drives its own wheel and it's all tight, it's packaged, it's condensed. With that new design, you can stick it into the mud. You can do a lot. It's just a lot better system for the axles. We're really happy about that. And we've increased the total horsepower to about 1,600 horsepower per truck. We changed up some of the design of the power distribution unit, like we got rid of the DC to DC links, the onboard charging, and we just kind of cleaned up the whole thing from what we learned, changed it up, made it simpler, took out a few parts that were redundant, and just installed some higher quality components. We found some components were lower quality, found a better source. Those ones are working a lot better, and we're just making those upgrades right now. So that brings us to the next one. Now that we're done testing, we've actually sold 5 of these semi-trucks, 10 trucks in total. We're building 2 for ourselves, 8 trucks for customers. This is the one that we're building for ourselves. One of the things I did notice on the design, we went that center seating cab. After driving it around a whole lot, I'm not really a big fan of the center seating. We tried it. It's great visibility, but I like this better. So we're building a winch tractor for ourselves, tri-drive setup. We're building this winch tractor for Royal Oil Field. We're building a snow plow for MCon. And here we go, we're building a tri-drive with a quad wagon for Tokal. So I finally got a logging truck sold, which I'm really, really stoked about, partnering up with Peerless on that one as well. And we're doing this truck, but don't worry about that truck. That's for a future day. And then we got 5 pickup trucks because people reached out and said, hey, can you just swap the axles? And we looked at it and, well, instead of using 6 batteries, well, we'll use 2 batteries. Instead of 5 inverters, we can get away with 2 inverters. We can use all the same parts. It's almost even the same electric motors, and we just swap those in there. So we got these trucks that we're building right now with some partners, and yeah, that's pretty well what we learned. I'm excited. After starting this company just over 3 years ago, we went from a rough proof of concept with that old 1960s LW. Last year, we had just built the truck. We had hauled 1 load. It was still a concept. This year, we were able to go out, go through all the government testing, certification, get the truck on the road, get hauling some logs, doing some low bedding work, get that information. We were able to take that truck to some customers. We showed it off. We sold those trucks. They came out. They did some test drives of it. They liked it. They were impressed enough that they were willing to buy a truck up front with that one. So that brings us to our next steps. What we're hoping to do next year is we got to find a shop because we're still working out of a tent shop in my parents' backyard. We need to raise some investment money to do that. So we've gone through the Canadian side of things to get it road legal with an X plate. Now we got to do the full federal motor vehicle safety standards to be able to bring it into the US. As right now, all the trucks are just in Canada because it's another $2-3 million to go through the US process. And until we raise the investment funds, we just can't afford to take that step, unfortunately. We'd like to hire on a couple more staff, a couple more programmers. We have some great guys, but they're definitely overworked. They're working, honestly, our staff and engineers are probably working more now than I did logging. But we're going to deliver the next 10 trucks this year, and we're going to continue to test the reliability. We sold 10 and we're not building any more. We're not taking any more sales until we get these 10 perfect and all the kinks we know are worked out of them. We're going to focus all our efforts in building 10 really good trucks, then keep taking sales and trying to grow more when the product isn't perfect. But do we got any questions on what we've done, what we've learned about these trucks? And yeah. Oh, what did the weight come into there? And I think we were 12,000 kg, 11,500, eh? No, with the Super B, 21? 21.5 with the Super B. So with the Doppler Super B, we were 21.5. I think the truck itself came in around 10,000 kgs. Yes. In BC, it's pretty awesome is that we can go to a full 65 ton being electric instead of the 63.5. I'm gonna have to convert that. What is that? 10,000. So we came in around 21,000 pounds with the truck, I think if my math is right on that one. With truck and trailer, we were around 45,000 pounds, and then total weight we're allowed to pack legally is around 148,000 pounds. So it can move some weight, and the nice thing is that the little bit of extra weight difference, it pretty well balances out, but with the extra weight allowance, I can pack an extra 3,000 pounds more than a diesel mechanical truck. Oh, that's the hardest one to answer for fuel savings because it entirely depends on what you're doing. And I hate giving that answer, but when you're in the bush and like when we're off-road, how do I tell those fuel? It depends on the road you're hauling. If you've got steeper ground, you're coming down loaded, the regen's fantastic. We did a mill-to-mill transfer on a short haul, had a fair bit of little regen, quick in and out, and we were able to do an 8-hour day without even having to fire the generator up. Like we got 8 hours without starting it, but that's a perfect haul. Running down the highway, what we found is if you're just doing 60 miles an hour down the highway, the fuel savings are about a wash. You can gear that truck up where a normal truck can be mated up. You get it up to speed, it's running at P1 RPM, it's just staying there in gear, and it doesn't really slow down. The advantages to this truck are the peak load saving. So every time you climb a hill or you start out from a red light, that's a huge peak load. Because when you're cruising down the highway, you really only need about 250 horsepower to keep a truck moving. But you need 500, 600 horsepower to climb a hill or get that thing started. So you end up oversizing your motor to get it started when you don't need that on the highway. So what we've done is we've went down to the average load, which is from a C15 down to a C9 cat, and the batteries take up that peak load demand. So when you're starting out from a light, the batteries give you that extra power. When you're climbing a hill, that comes from the batteries. You don't have to rev up the motor. So the generator fires up, stays at 1 RPM, and the batteries do all that, and then when you slow down. So the best answer for fuel savings is the harder you work the truck, the better your fuel savings are. I don't recommend this if you've got a lot of highway miles to do. You're doing 10 hours at highway speeds, this probably isn't the solution for you. If you've got a short haul where you're up and down a lot, or we found in stop and go traffic, city driving, that it's fantastic because you're always slowing down. You slow down for a red light and then you recapture that energy and you use it to accelerate back again on the green light. So yeah, the miles per gallon is the same on the highway, huge improvements in the bush and in city. Oh yeah, I don't know how that works down here in the States, but I got a letter from Canada and we're allowed to run dyed diesel. It explicitly says in there, in the Colored Fuel Act, that generators are permitted to run dyed diesel. And I asked the Ministry of Transport and said, hey, if I got a generator mounted to a truck, can I run dyed diesel? And they said, yeah, a generator mounted to the truck, as long as it doesn't share the fuel tank with the vehicle motor driving the truck, you're okay. Well, the batteries are the motor. And then talked with them, and yeah, it's no different than if you pulled your Tesla up to a charger and that charger had a generator, that Tesla would be charging with dyed diesel on the stationary generator. What's the difference if you put the generator on the ground or put the generator in the truck? Yeah, kind of made sense. And although I do have a funny one, we lost a sale to a customer on that way. It shows you kind of how nuts this whole EV green thing was, is that there was a mine. And this mine mandated that the trucking company have a zero emissions vehicle in order to do the haul. You had to buy an electric vehicle if you were going to bid on the haul. Well, they were running full train weights in the mountains, so 145,000 pounds, and they looked around and they're like, well, an electric truck isn't going to do the job. The batteries aren't there enough. And so they approached us and said, hey, we'd love to know a hybrid. We gave them a quote. They said, oh, well, that sounds fantastic. We'd love to partner on it. They turned around, went to the mine and said, hey, we're thinking about getting this hybrid truck because the full electric won't do the job. The mine turned around and said, no, that's not in the contract. That's not a zero emissions vehicle. Plug-in hybrid doesn't count because it still has a generator on board. So they went and turned around and bought an electric truck. And then they realized that they had no charging infrastructure at the mine where they load to fuel it. It didn't have the range, so they'd have to stop halfway, and they couldn't bring the power systems in there in order to get fast charging for a truck. So they brought out 2 diesel generators, sat them on the side, so the electric truck now pulls next to the diesel generator, plugs in, recharges the vehicle, and now that's zero emissions truck. But if the generator was under the hood of the truck, it's no longer zero emissions. So that's how that works. We found that out. Yeah, we're all sold out now, so we can't really do any more orders. It's why we're building a couple of trucks for ourselves. So once we get those trucks built, we're going to take those ones out to people interested in testing it, send them one of those trucks. They can test them out, but we're just upgrading Topsy with the new programming, the new part, so it's going to be down for about 2-3 months. Come February, we're going to start our testing again with a few companies, and then we'll test with the next one, but we aren't selling any more right now. Just doesn't make sense to keep selling them until you know that they're perfect. Any other questions there? Right on. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chace.
Thanks.